Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another lecture of the Advanced Digital Editing short course that we're doing here at the School of Advanced Study, University of London. We're now moving into the XSLT section of the short course, and my colleague, Gabriel Bodard, is going to introduce XSLT for us. Gabby, please take it away.
Thanks, Christopher. So yes, I'm going to, in this session, I'm going to introduce the very basics of XSLT and the building block of which is this element called a template. And at the end, I will explain the difference between push processing and pull processing, as shown in the title here, and an exercise that you can take away and try out yourself on push processing if you like. So to get started, just a very quick reminder that XSLT can be used in a variety of different ways, and I won't go through all of this in great detail, but it can be used to transform one or multiple XML files into one or multiple HTML pages or HTML constructs of one kind or another, such as individual pages, indexes, summaries, individual structured pages for data. Or it can be used to convert an XML file to other XML, either to a different XML schema to improve the XML in the current XML schema, to restructure a corpus in some way into another format, or to transform an XML file which you might also want to publish in HTML, but into something like FO, which will give you PDFs, ODT, which will give you OpenOffice or Word documents, EPUB files that people can read on an ebook reader, etc., in different formats, all of which use XML as their background. The different scenarios in which you use XSLT might include some of those shown on this slide. The basic distinction is whether you have a style sheet which transforms or converts a file from one format to another, or whether there's something that you use for publication and therefore you use repeatedly, either repeatedly across the same corpus of files or repeatedly over different collections of files over time that use a standard format. The main ways in which this is often used publicly by large projects are these community style sheets, which can be used both by an individual project to produce output and can be reused by others, either in a very generic way or customized to be more specific to their project. As an example of this, I'm just going to explain a little bit about one example, which is the Epidoc style sheets, which are a bunch of style sheets produced by the Epidoc community. The Epidoc community have their own schema, which is a subset of the TEI, and have a set of guidelines for encoding epigraphic and other ancient text-bearing objects using TEI XML. And they have this set of style sheets which are designed for multiple purposes. One is that they demonstrate the expectations of the schema and of the recommended usage of TEI by saying, if you encode this in this way, this is the kind of output you're likely to want to see. They're community maintained. They're designed to fulfill the requirements of the projects who have contributed to them, who make up that community. And there are multiple sets of style sheets within them, or multiple parameterized paths through the style sheets, which will produce HTML, plain text, for import into databases, for example, OpenOffice documents, FO PDFs, and so forth. And there's all sorts of parameters in there which enable different options to be set for editorial conventions, page structure, types of transcription, and all sorts of other things in there. So the purpose of talking about these style sheets is just to give a sense of the way in which you might work with style sheets in an established project. You're much more likely, if you're working on a TEI project following any sort of guidelines, you're much more likely to take an existing style sheet or set of style sheets and perhaps customize them for your purpose, or perhaps use them as is, and you'll find that they work 99% how you want them to. But rather than from scratch writing a bunch of style sheets from the very beginning. Nevertheless, even if you're doing this, you're going to want to understand a little bit about how XSLT works, and at least the concept of the template and the various elements that are used within templates. So this presentation is by way of an introduction to some of these basic concepts. As we've said before, and it's worth reiterating, XSLT is it's a language, it's a programming language that is expressed in XML. So an XSLT style sheet is an XML file with various elements that serve the functions of commands in a programming language. So the template, which is the core of most XSLT style sheets, is this element called template. The XSL at the beginning of it there is the namespace, to make it clear that we're talking about an XSLT element, not a HTML element, as some of the other elements in this file are. So you've got this basic template which matches the TI element speech and produces the following output. It produces a P element, and we were assuming that this is a HTML element P, and then it says whatever else you find inside speech, run the style sheets on them as you find them. Run the templates in here on them as you find them. So apply templates to whatever you find inside. Okay, so this is the most basic template that simply says whenever on following through this this XML file, you come across a TI element, an element in the TI namespace with the name sp, that is speech, do the following things to it. And apply templates will also capture any text within that element if there's nothing else intervening that another template is running on first. It's worth noting that if you don't match an element with a template, say you have a speech element in your XML file and there's no template like this one that matches speech, what is effectively going to do is the same as if it found this template. If you write this template and you say find speech and then apply templates to it, what it does is the element speech itself disappears in this process, because you're not saying to replicate the element, but you're saying apply templates to the contents. And that's what happens if you don't have a template matching a particular element. So if you have a speech element, no template matching it, it'll say, okay, speech element, I don't know what to do with it, so I'll ignore the element, but all of its contents I will run through a process from if I have any templates to match them. And if I don't have any templates at all, I'll end up just printing any text that I find inside them. If you want not to do this, if you want not to print the text inside an element at all, or to apply templates to any of its contents, you can put in an empty template like this. And remember from basic XML that this slash at the end of the opening tag means that this is effectively the same as if we had XSL template and then slash XSL template with nothing at all in between. So it says when you find the TI element speech, do nothing. Neither duplicate it, nor run templates on its contents, nor print any text inside it, nothing at all. Just omit that template. But more common than either of those is a template like this, where you get the template in and you want the element in and you want to do something to it. And apply templates is this absolutely key part of the style sheet. It enables you to not only do something to the top level elements as you find them, but also to anything that's inside them. I don't know what might be inside this speech element. There may be all sorts of inline tags in the text itself, things that are supplied and restored and in verse and various other things, and I want to process those in various ways, but I can't predict in advance where they will appear. So I write this apply templates command, and it finds whatever's inside and it does whatever is needed to that, depending on other templates in this style sheet. So here's an example of a speech element, an SP element, two of them in fact, with containing elements. They each contain a speaker and a line. They also have these attributes, the who attribute on the speech element. When we run this style sheet on that, well, I'll show you what happens when we what comes out of that in a moment. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to do something slightly more nuanced than simply printing its content in a P. I'm going to say, firstly, I want to print the value of the who attribute on that speech. Note here we've got speech who equals Bernardo and the second speech who equals Francisco. I want to print the value of that who attribute. So XSL value of is different from XSL apply templates in that firstly you have to select something, you have to say what I want to print the value of, and secondly all it does is prints the plain text value of that. Now an attribute like who can only have plain text content in it, so that makes sense. If I use value of on an element with a select equals and then an element name in there rather than an attribute name, then any markup that there might be inside that element would be lost. It would just convert the entire element into plain text, lose any XML tags that are in there, and just print the plain text. So that's the difference between apply templates and value of. Value of is much less powerful, but sometimes it's very neat and it's exactly what you want. But say I want to print the value of the who attribute in this paragraph, followed by apply templates, but only to the L elements inside. I look again at my XML, you see, if I'm printing the value of the who element, then I don't want also the speaker element in there, okay? I want to say Bernardo, who's there, and then Francisco, etc. This is relevant because the speaker element and the who attribute are different, and I can choose which of the two I want to keep in this case. So if I do this, I might want to also put a template for L in there. You see, this is saying apply templates to L. So let's write a template for L. When we come across an L element, let's put in a line break in HTML, and then let's apply templates, but let's put the content of that apply templates in a span element, which might enable us to do things with it in CSS at some point later in the publication process. So here again is the XML snippet, and here is what we get when we run that style sheet on it. We take the value of, remember, the attribute, not of the speaker element. We have a BR, which gives you a new line on the HTML page, and then we have the value of the line in a span element. And if there were multiple lines, there'd be multiple BRs and multiple spans surrounding those lines. A couple of notes about good practice. I should note I'm going to try to go through a lot of this quite quickly, and especially some of the examples later in this presentation. So please feel free to pause this video and digest the contents of the individual slides, and the slides are also available separately if you want to download them and look through them in your own time. So a couple of notes about good practice. Firstly, is that so far we've been printing the HTML values that we want to include in here just as those HTML elements. It's generally considered better practice to use this XSL element command instead, which enables you to do slightly more to these things. It gives you a little bit more control. In practice, for simple examples like the ones we've seen so far, it's exactly the same, and there's no harm in just using the P element in there. But having an element command with name equals P gives you a little bit more control over what you're doing. So if you've got, for example, a slightly more advanced piece of XML, I've just got a couple more attributes in here for the examples we're going to see in a moment. we might also use the attribute command to attach attributes to the span element, rather than trying to print those attributes in the span element that you see there, as if we were writing HTML directly in the style sheet. This again, you can do the former, but this gives you slightly more control over it, especially if you want to have slightly more advanced things such as decisions and loops inside that attribute value. And the third piece of good practice that I just want to point out is that, again, if you want to print some plain text in your output, it's good practice to surround that by the XSL text element, which enables you to be clear that what I want to print is that colon and the space following it. It's not all the spaces before that up to the beginning of the line and the carriage return that is after the apply templates and before this line. It's just the colon and the space. That's what I want to print. And it just allows you to be a lot more specific and accurate about what you're outputting and what you're not. A couple more XSLT elements and functions, commands rather, that are used to help you make decisions as you process. The first of these is an if command. This is the most common command in pretty much every programming language you'll see. This basically says, if a certain condition is met, then do something. If not, then ignore me. Okay, so we're matching the speaker element in this template. We're creating a HTML element called span, and we're saying if the content of this speaker element, that's the current context is speaker, so if the content of this current element is not equal to, and this is basic XPath of the kind that you'll have seen in earlier videos, is not equal to the value of the who attribute of the speech element, the SP element, that is the parent of this speaker. So if the who element and the content of the speaker element, the who attribute of the parent speech and the content of the speaker element do not match, they are not identical, and note that they have to be in every way identical for this not to be triggered, including capitalization and so forth. Then give an attribute on this span element called title, which contains the value of that who attribute. Bear in mind that what that will do, the title element will, in most HTML environments, will put a hover, a tooltip, giving the name, the normalized name of the speaker when you hover over that element. So what this does is it prints the speaker name, but if the speaker name and the normalized speaker, the reference to this of the speech, don't match, then it also adds a hover element where when you hover over it, you get a little tooltip saying the version. So in the example we saw before, we'll see Bernard in plain text and Barnard in a hover if we hover over it. The other way of doing decisions like this, which gives you a little bit more control over what you're doing, if just basically says, if this condition is matched, then do this. If not, then do nothing. Just ignore me. The choose command allows you to have several options and also to have a fallback option. So it's not just if A, then do B, otherwise do nothing. It's if A, then do this, or then do this, or do this, and if none of the above is true, then do this as a fallback. Okay, so here's an example of a choose element. There are two main elements inside this. There's when, and in this case, this is very similar to the if. It's saying when test equals, and so a when is effectively is used exactly like an if. So it's saying if this test is matched, then do everything inside this element, and if it is, then you go to the end of the choose. You ignore the rest of everything. So as soon as a when is matched, then you can ignore the rest of this choose element. But if it is not matched, then you go to the next when in the list, and then the next when in the list. And if none of them are matched, then you go to this otherwise, which is basically saying only if none of the whens in this choose are matched, then do the following. And so it's useful to always have a fallback, or when it is useful to have a fallback, then using choose when and otherwise instead of using if gives you a lot more control over how you make these decisions and what goes on inside them. So in this case, you want to say when the content and the who attribute don't match, first apply templates and then add some extra information. And you don't want to say when they do match, do nothing, because you still want to apply templates in that case. So that's why you've got when and an otherwise rather than a simple if in this case. And the last kind of decision-making element that I'll talk about for now is this element for each. And this is slightly different. Firstly, this loops through things, so it can work. It can run multiple times, but it can also run 0 times, because if you say for each and what you select is something that is not true, that doesn't exist, then it just skips it. But it also, quite importantly, it changes the context from the element that is matched in the template to the element that is selected in the for each. So when I'm in this case, I'm saying whenever you get a speech, create a table, and then for each line inside that speech, create a row in this table which has a cell for the line number, a cell for the speaker, and a cell for the content. That's where we have the apply templates, which is whatever is inside the SP. Note that the context in here, when we say select equals @n, this is not the @n of the speech whose template is being matched. This is the @n of the L element that was selected in the for each, and it's the @n of the first L element the first time we run through this. The second time it's the n of the second N element. The third time it's the n of the third element, etc. Okay, so the context follows the element inside the for each. A couple of quick notes about packaging and output. This is again not something that you'll need to do from scratch very often, but every XSL style sheet, in addition to having all those templates, has a certain amount of packaging around it. So firstly, the root element of the style sheet document, remember that every XML file has to have a root element. The root element in this case is called style sheet. So in the XSL namespace, there's this root element called style sheet, which has some namespace declarations in here. So this is telling me that whenever I use the XSL prefix on an element, this is the namespace that refers to, and it's also saying that we're using XSLT I in this case. There are 3 versions of XSLT. II is the one we're most likely to want to use. So that's the default for now. But you don't really need to understand all this. Just bear in mind that if you want to create your own style sheet from scratch, maybe start with copying and pasting from this slide that you've got a style sheet, you're telling it that it's a style sheet, you're telling it that you want to output in HTML5, and that the default encoding is going to be UTF-8, Unicode, which I think would be the case even if you didn't say encoding was UTF-8, but it doesn't hurt to say so. And then any templates you want to put in there, you put inside the style sheet after the output method. Okay, so this gives you the basic, and because most of the time you will be editing style sheets, and for the purposes of the workshops that we tend to run here at the University of London, we'll give you a template. I will give you a standard style sheet to build on and develop. You won't need to remember this and do this from scratch, but this is what's going on when you see the surroundings of your style sheet. The other element that you might find useful is this XSL result document element, which enables you to create a HTML file or any other XML file from inside your style sheet. You can either, as you will have seen in one of the earlier videos where we showed you how to run XSLT on XML in Oxygen, you can define what your output HTML or XML file is as part of the transformation there, or you can define it here inside the style sheet. This is useful. This is in fact essential to be able to do it the second way. If you might want to create more than one HTML file, more than one output file from a single input file. So for every new div element inside this, you want to create a new HTML file, then you would need to use result document to create that file. And so you use href to say this is where I want you to put that file and what I want you to name it. Name it after, in this case, after the XML ID attribute on whatever element that has just been matched. And inside I want you to create the basic, the minimal elements of a HTML file, and in the body of that file, put in everything that is inside the current document. Okay, the current element that has been matched. Finally, just a few words about push and pull processing. What we've been describing so far is largely push processing, although the last example of talking about result document is also very useful for pull processing. But the basic difference between the two is that push processing essentially follows the source XML file's structure and uses the XSL template primarily to cascade through that source document and do transformations on elements wherever and whenever you find them within that source document. This makes it ideal for working with things like editions, other text documents, XML that's created for publication, like a manuscript edition or an epidoc file. This also ensures that nothing in the file gets lost, because the default behavior is to pass along all contents, especially all text contents, of an element, even if that element isn't explicitly matched. So things don't get lost. So this is very powerful, and this is the default practice for the kind of XSLT that we're normally talking about when we're making critical editions. A pull template, a pull process, on the other hand, enables you to create a new structure for your file. So whatever order things might be in the source, you're going to choose what order they're in your result document. It's going to use a lot of for each and value of elements to go and get things from various places in the source file, or potentially even if you don't know where they are in the source file, and put them in the specific place you want them in your result file. This is useful for data-heavy types of XML processing, and for creating archival versions or new versions of these files. This makes it very easy to omit things that you're not interested in. You only keep the things that you know that you want, that you've expected to find in there. This means that if the XML file has a lot of junk in it, or has a lot of things that are not relevant to you, they don't get kept by default as they would if you were pushing the XML file through a stylesheet, because you're just going and pulling out the bits you're interested in. Okay, and we'll talk a little bit more about pull processing in a later video, but for now, the example we want to talk about here is about push processing. And so the exercise which we suggest, and if you're following this video on YouTube not as part of a workshop, you can find a copy of the zip file which contains the package for these exercises at the following link. And the exercise, which again, if you're at a workshop, we'll discuss this in more detail later, is basically to run this style sheet which you've provided you with, which does almost nothing, but it gives you the basic structure and the basic template on an XML file that we provided you, and look at it in a web browser, see what's come out of it, look at it also in your XML editor, and what do you see in the XML of that output as well, and you'll see very little. Using what you've learned so far in this video, what could you add to get better output from that transformation? And so your exercise is to edit that style sheet and make it do more. So I'll leave you with that for now, and you probably want to go and spend a certain amount of time practicing before you watch the next video.
Thanks, Gabby. So is it fair to say then that generally pushing is like publishing and pulling is more like data analysis, data crunching, generally speaking?
That's probably true. It's also fair to say, I should say, that most style sheets will have a little bit of both in them.
Right.
There will, even if you're very much pulling a little bit from here and there, and you want to get in, there will occasionally come a time where you want to apply templates because there might be things inside this context that you don't want to lose. Right. And likewise, even when you're pushing for publication, there may be things that you want to do in a certain order in the output. You want to make sure you add, you add, and omit, that you add metadata output from the header and things like that. That you wouldn't really want to push on the TI header, for example. You almost certainly want to pull information out of the TI header. Push is much more useful for the body, which has all sorts of text divs in there. Yeah. So you're almost certainly going to be combining the two, but the simplest thing to do is push. Yeah.
Yeah. I have a question that often comes up when we're introducing XSLT. And it's kind of a weird question, so bear with me. But basically, it's how does the system or the parser or whatever know what apply templates contains? Like what's in it? Like what are the templates that it's calling upon? In other words, it sounds like it's just content most of the time, but that idea of applying a template sometimes throws people off.
Right. So. I guess there are two essential principles here. One is that in a given style sheet, which might have multiple templates in it, both regular templates that match things and specific templates that might do more advanced things if it's a pull style sheet, the order of those templates is arbitrary. So it doesn't, like in many programming languages, start at the top and work its through to the bottom. That's what happens within a template, but within the style sheet, all those templates are at the same level. And when you're applying templates on a file, the first element it comes to, and the first element it'll come to in the entire file, is the root element, right? So it's going to be this TI element in a TI file. It'll say, is there anywhere in this file a template that matches this TI element? If there's not, then we'll just pass it through and apply templates to all of its children: TI header, facsimile, text, whatever.
All the content of the nodes, in other words.
Right. Yeah. So all the contents of this, and the TI element and the TI header element will never have text nodes as their direct children, but you don't have to go too far down before you start to get elements that do. And when you're just applying templates to a text node, what that just means is print the text.
Right.
Yeah. If that sort of answers the question. And so yeah, the point I made, and maybe not very clearly at the beginning, that the default behavior, if you don't find a template matching a particular element, is to skip that element but apply templates to all of its children, to all of its contents, is also what's happening at the very top of a transformation of an XML file. You don't need to say apply templates to this entire file, because that's what it's doing by default. That's what it means to run a style sheet on an XML file. It's saying apply the templates in this style sheet to whatever you find in this XML file.
Right. Thank you. That's helpful. That was great. Thank you.
Cheers.